Timothy, welcome. Would you please introduce yourselves to to people who will be watching this?
Yeah, my name is Timothy Seamans. I am an Episcopal priest and a school chaplain in Los Angeles, California. I work with middle and upper schoolers, and I know Steve through a pilgrimage that I took to Ferguson a couple years back. But I'm glad to be here and have a conversation.
Thank you. So what kind of gifts or experiences that you have do you draw on in a time like this when people are facing such great challenges?
I think that one of my gifts is the ability to speak to children. I think how this translates into a time like this is speaking to children and young people often requires a great deal of patience and a simplicity of thinking and repetition. And if you're anything like me right now, there's a great deal of repetition in your life and a need to take your thoughts and your actions and your habits and try to get to the kernel or to the most simplified version of those things. And once you find the language for that simple or that bare, stripped down idea or activity or practice, I think that you get to know it a lot better, and you see yourself reflected in it. So that notion of trying to make your practices, your everyday practices, a form of prayer. And I can't remember the monk who is known for making that popular in the medieval period, but trying to live monastically in this moment in a simplified way has been what helps me get through each day. And I take it each day minute by minute. As a father with a 1-year-old daughter and a wife, and both of us working full time from our 2-bedroom apartment. The cloisters here require a lot of simplicity to make space for each other and for thinking and for living. And so I think that prayer as a way of being is how I've been trying to approach each minute, and not thinking too far ahead of myself. I don't have the bandwidth for it, but I can imagine doing it, and it seems really unpleasant.
So what kind of advice would you offer to others who are in the midst of this same challenging time?
I've been thinking a lot about, I read a book last month about prayer. It's called Prayer, A Guide for the Perplexed by Ashley Coxworth, I think. Coxburn, something like that. And central to the premise is the idea of prayer as a conversation. And her claim that she puts forward from ancient times is that the conversation of prayer is firstly a conversation that's already going on. A conversation of prayer is first a conversation that's already going on inside of us, in the sense of that the Christ that is within all people, and in whose image all people are made, is always in conversation with the Father deep within your soul.
Mm.
And so the first step towards prayerfulness is not one of speaking, but one of listening to the divine conversation that's already happening inside of you. And I think that the condition we all find ourselves in is that being a lot of quietness and close quarters and repetition are pretty hopeful to force you to listen to yourself, if you're willing to turn your digital devices off every once in a while. And so my advice would be to, what I've been trying to do is to listen to that conversation that's already happening inside of me, between the Trinity. And sometimes speak when I feel called to speak, but most of the time I find myself being part of that presence. And it's not even a verbal conversation all of the time, but that way of thinking about prayer has been really helpful for me recently. And I've been trying to recommend it to anyone I know who's willing to listen about. It takes away the need to speak. And even when we do speak, the Lord's Prayer is a good entry point. It's already the divine conversation. And so we're just participating in it. So, like I said, the simplicity of those lines and the time to think about those and what they mean I spend a lot of my day doing that while I'm also parenting and saying it out loud to my daughter, and letting this period of distance give me some time to reflect.
Thank you. Is there a question that's been a constant presence sort of in your mind or your heart kind of rolling around during this period of time?
I think that one question that has been on my heart and on my mind a lot, that comes from this kind of simplicity and this stripped down way of being and a prayerful way of being, for me, is this question of just what are you doing here? Kind of an existential question, I guess, but this are you living the life are you I don't even know if that's the question, is what are you doing here? And I think times of crisis force people to ask big questions, not just what are you doing here, but what are we doing here as a community, as a civilization? What could we do to live differently? So I encourage people to don't avoid big questions. Now is probably a really good time to have those big questions and those deeper conversations when there's no rush to get to the answer. I think maybe that's why I'm asking those deeper kind of questions, because this isn't going to end anytime soon, and there's no rush. A rushed answer would be a bad answer. So I think that's the question. It's been, what am I and what are we doing here, and how can we do it in a way that is sustainable and survivable and glorifies our Creator. So that's what I've been thinking about.
Well, Timothy, thank you so much for taking this time in the midst of all of what you have going on, and thanks for sharing your wisdom.
Yeah, thanks for letting me discover what I think about those questions. So have a good one.
Thanks, you too.